The night Ethan was born was one of those cold, wind-swept evenings in early November, when the air itself seemed to carry secrets. The hospital was quiet, save for the faint hum of machines and the occasional cry from the maternity ward. In one of the smaller rooms, a terrified 17-year-old girl named Laura held a newborn against her chest, her trembling fingers tracing the curve of his cheek. She had named him Ethan, though she never told anyone. The nurses simply marked him as baby boy, unknown father. Her parents had made the decision for her. The baby would be left at the hospital for his own good. Laura cried silently, her tears falling onto the soft blue blanket wrapped around the infant. Hours later, as dawn painted the horizon pink, Laura slipped out of the room. She turned back once, seeing the tiny bundle sleeping in the bassinet. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Please forgive me someday." That was the last time she saw him, or so she thought. Ethan was adopted 2 months later by Mark and Helen Carter, a couple who had spent years battling infertility. They lived in a quiet suburb outside Chicago, and from the moment they held Ethan, he became their miracle. They raised him with laughter, warmth, and bedtime stories about courage and love. Yet, no matter how cherished he was, Ethan always felt an invisible thread pulling him toward something, or someone, he couldn't name. When he turned 12, Helen decided to tell him the truth. Sitting on the porch swing, she handed him a small wooden box. Inside was a faded hospital bracelet with his birth date and the word, "Baby Boy, 1989. "This was yours," she said softly. "We wanted you to have it when you were ready. You were chosen, Ethan. You were loved from the very beginning." He nodded, pretending to understand, but inside him something shifted. He wondered about the woman who had given him life and disappeared. Did she ever think of him? Did she regret it? Years passed. Ethan grew into a kind and thoughtful man. He studied architecture, traveled, built friendships, and met Olivia, a photographer whose laugh could brighten any room. She made him believe in forever. When he finally proposed to her on a snowy evening under the city lights, he felt, for the first time, that maybe he was whole. But the past has a strange way of echoing into the present. 2 weeks before their wedding, Olivia's best friend Samantha posted a photo from her cousin's wedding on social media. It was a beautiful shot, a wide family picture taken in front of a vineyard in Wisconsin. Ethan glanced at it absently as Olivia showed him, pointing out the bridesmaids' dresses. But then something in the background caught his eye. A woman stood near the edge of the group, not smiling, holding a glass of champagne. She looked to be in her early 50s. Around her wrist, almost hidden beneath the sleeve of her lavender dress, was a faded hospital bracelet. Ethan froze. It couldn't be. He zoomed in, his heart pounding. The bracelet was identical to his. Same color, same plastic texture, and though the photo was slightly blurred, he could just make out the same printed date, November 3rd, 1989. "What's wrong?" Olivia asked, noticing his face drain of color. Ethan swallowed hard. "That woman, I think I know her." Olivia frowned. "From where?" He hesitated, feeling the ground shift beneath him. "From before I was born." The room went silent. And in that moment, the life Ethan thought he knew began to unravel. If you were in Ethan's place, would you try to find out who that woman really was, or would you let the past stay buried? Tell us in the comments below. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He lay awake with the hospital bracelet in his palm, the plastic warm from his grip, the tiny ridges pressing into his skin like braille from another life. At 2:13 a.m., he opened his laptop and pulled up the photo again. The vineyard stretched behind the gathered guests like a painted backdrop. But his eyes went straight to the woman with the lavender sleeve and the faded band. He took a breath and typed a message to Samantha. "Hey, random question. Who's the woman in the lavender dress near the back holding a champagne flute, relative of yours?" He hesitated for a full minute before hitting send. The reply came just after dawn. "That's my aunt, Laura Bennett. She's complicated. Why?" His heart jolted. Laura. He looked at the bracelet in his hand, then typed, "I think I may know her, or at least I think she might know me." Samantha's dots blinked, disappeared, blinked again. She lives in Brookfield, works part-time at a church pantry, volunteers at County General on Wednesdays. If you want to meet her, I can ask. Ethan closed his eyes. The name of the hospital sliced through him. County General. That was the name on his adoption papers. He remembered the box Helen had given him at 12. He hadn't looked through it in years, but the memory of the other items tugged at him. A photocopied page from a medical file, a Polaroid of a swaddled newborn, and a single sheet of lined paper with a sentence written in delicate, slanted handwriting. If you ever read this, I hope you forgave me. Now the handwriting mattered. The past wasn't just a shadow. It had a name and an address. Olivia found him at the kitchen table, the morning sun throwing pale gold across his shoulders. You didn't sleep, did you? He shook his head. Her name is Laura. She volunteers at the hospital where I was born. Olivia pulled out a chair. Do you want me to come with you? He considered it. Part of him wanted a witness, a hand to squeeze, a steady voice to interrupt the spiral if it came. Another part felt strangely private about what the first words should be. Maybe for the drive, he said finally. But I think I should talk to her first. Just me. They drove north to Brookfield that afternoon. The town looked like the kind of place that loves Saturdays. Kids zipped past on scooters, leaves skittered across sidewalks, and outside a cafe called Gable and Grain, a musician strummed an acoustic guitar. Ethan's stomach churned with every street name they passed, Maple, Jefferson, Honeysuckle, as if one of them would ring with the frequency of his life. The church pantry was a brick building with a white steeple, and a handwritten sign on the door read, Distribution Day, 3 to 5 p.m. Inside, a handful of volunteers packed boxes with rice, beans, canned vegetables. A woman with silver-streaked hair and a lavender cardigan taped a carton shut, then looked up. Her face was older than the one in the photo, as faces stubbornly are in real life. But the eyes, clear and searching, were the same. Ethan's breath caught. He told himself to act normal, to pretend he had wandered in to donate. But when she stepped closer and asked, "Can I help you?" the words came out of him in a voice that did not feel like his own. "Were you at a wedding last month in a vineyard near Madison?" Laura's expression shifted. "Yes, my niece's." She paused, studying him. "Why do you ask?" Ethan's hands felt empty. He had left the bracelet in the car, afraid of the drama of it. "Because I think I might know you." He swallowed. "My name is Ethan Carter. I was born at County General on November 3rd, 1989. Silence. The bustle of the pantry thinned into a dull hum. Laura lifted a hand to her mouth, her eyes filling so quickly it was as if she'd been waiting her whole life for this precise sentence to free them. "Ethan," she whispered, the syllables trembling. "Ethan." She reached for a folding chair and sank into it, her gaze locked on his. "I had a baby that day," she said, barely audible. "I named him Ethan in my head because I wasn't allowed to put it on the forms. They told me I couldn't." She shut her eyes. "They told me he didn't make it." The room tilted. Ethan gripped the edge of a table. "Didn't make it?" "My parents handled it," she continued, voice fraying. "They said it was best I didn't see him again. I begged for one last moment and a nurse. She looked at me and said she was sorry for my loss." Laura wiped her cheeks. "I never held him after that first hour. I left the bracelet on so I wouldn't forget the date. I thought..." Her breath hitched. "I thought he died." Ethan felt something dark and old recoil inside him. The story he had told himself for years. The quiet rage, the ache of abandonment. It cracked. No, it rearranged, as if the past had been misfiled in a drawer with the wrong label. The idea that Laura hadn't rejected him, but had been deceived, sent heat rushing behind his eyes. He pulled the bracelet from his pocket. He had tucked it there at the last second before leaving the car, and set it gently on the table between them. "I kept mine too." Laura touched it, and for a moment, she looked like the girl she had been at 17, all uncertainty and hope. "I looked for you," she said, voice steadier now. "I wrote letters I never sent. I called the hospital records office a dozen times, but everything was sealed. I told myself it was punishment. Then, a few years ago, I started volunteering here and at the hospital. It felt like, if I couldn't mother the boy I lost, I could at least be kind to someone else's." The clock over the pantry door ticked. The other volunteers worked around them, giving them a respectful ring of quiet. Ethan found his voice. "There's a wedding in 2 weeks," he said. "Mine. I would like you to be there." Laura's hand flew to her mouth again, but this time she laughed through the tears. "If you want me there, I will come. I'll sit in the back, I'll hide in the kitchen, whatever you need." He shook his head. "No hiding." Olivia, who had waited outside in the car, watched from the doorway now, sensing that the moment had shifted from brittle to tender. When Laura noticed her, Ethan made the introductions. Olivia stepped forward and without hesitation hugged Laura. "We're glad you're here," she said. "All of you." There would be time for questions. So many questions. Who had told Laura the baby hadn't survived? Why had the records vanished into sealed files and euphemisms? But as they stood together in that modest church pantry, the three of them felt the shape of a new beginning, forming where a void had been. Later, as dusk settled and they walked to their cars, Laura stopped short. "There's someone else you should meet," she said, her voice cautious but resolute. "Someone who was there the night you were born. Someone who might finally explain everything." Ethan looked at Olivia, then back at Laura. The wind carried the faint scent of rain. "Who?" he asked. Laura exhaled, her gaze steady. "The nurse." The drive home was quiet. The windshield wipers swayed rhythmically, the sound filling the car as Ethan stared out into the drizzle. Laura's words replayed in his mind like a haunting melody. "They told me he didn't make it." He felt both anger and compassion fighting for space inside him. When they pulled into the driveway, Olivia touched his hand. "You did the right thing," she whispered. Ethan nodded, though he wasn't sure what right meant anymore. That night, he called Laura. Her voice was fragile, cautious, but laced with determination. "Her name is Margaret Doyle," she said. "She was the night nurse in the maternity ward that week. She still lives nearby. I've seen her a few times at the hospital." Ethan hesitated. "Do you think she'll talk to us?" "I think," Laura replied, "she's been waiting to." 2 days later, they met at a small cafe near the hospital. Margaret arrived right on time. A woman in her 70s, still sharp-eyed, with a posture that spoke of decades spent standing beside hospital beds. She looked at Laura first, and her expression softened into instant recognition. "I never thought I'd see you again," she said quietly. Laura's voice trembled. "You told me my baby died." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want to," she said. "I wanted to tell you the truth, but I was ordered not to. Your parents, they were very powerful people in town. They arranged everything privately. They said the child would be placed in adoption immediately. But they didn't want you to know. They made me sign a confidentiality statement." Ethan clenched his jaw. "So you let her believe her baby was dead?" Margaret looked at him, remorse cutting deep lines across her face. "I didn't let her, I was trapped. But the day after she left, I went back to the nursery. The baby, you are, were still there, healthy, crying. I held you for a moment before the social worker came to take you away. I whispered your name into your ear. Ethan, I wanted at least one thing to survive the lie." Laura's breath broke. Ethan's throat tightened. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Finally, Margaret slid a small photo across the table, a Polaroid of a newborn wrapped in a blue blanket. "I kept this," she said softly. "I thought maybe one day the truth would come out. I'm glad it did before I'm gone." Ethan stared at the photo. His own face, impossibly small, impossibly familiar. When they left the cafe, the sky had cleared. Laura walked beside him, silent, as though afraid a single word would shatter the fragile peace that had settled over them. After a few steps, she stopped. "I spent years hating myself," she said. "But now I realize, and it wasn't me who abandoned you. It was the world that abandoned both of us." Ethan looked at her, his eyes glistening. "I know," he said simply, "and I think it's time we stop letting it win." In the days that followed, Ethan's life became a strange intersection of joy and reckoning. The wedding was approaching, guest lists, catering, rehearsals, yet every moment felt charged with new meaning. His fiancée could see it too. Olivia often found him lost in thought, fingers tracing the outline of the bracelet on his wrist. One evening, while they were arranging table cards, she said, "You know, we can leave a chair for her." Ethan looked up. "For Laura?" Olivia nodded. "Next to your parents. You've got two families now. They should all be part of your beginning." He smiled, a quiet, trembling smile. "You always know the right thing to say." But that night, when everyone had gone to sleep, Ethan sat alone in the living room and pulled out the box Helen had given him all those years ago. He added the Polaroid Margaret had returned, setting it beside the bracelet. Then he opened his phone and looked at the vineyard photo, the one that had started it all. He realized how a single image, a frozen second in time, had unmasked decades of secrets. It made him wonder, how many other people live entire lives not knowing the truth about where they came from? When the wedding day finally arrived, sunlight spilled through the church windows like liquid gold. Olivia walked down the aisle radiant and calm, her eyes fixed on him. But before the ceremony began, Ethan turned toward the rows of guests and saw her. Laura sat in the third row, wearing the same lavender color from the vineyard photo. Her hands trembled in her lap, but her eyes shone with pride. Beside her, Mark and Helen Carter smiled, unaware of the deeper thread connecting them all. As the music began, Ethan's gaze locked with Laura's. For the first time, there was no confusion, only gratitude. But just as peace began to settle in his heart, a figure appeared at the back of the church. An elderly man in a dark suit, unfamiliar, yet oddly significant. He wasn't on the guest list. He didn't belong to either family. Laura saw him too, and her face turned pale. Ethan followed her gaze. "Who is that?" he whispered. Laura's voice shook. "That's your grandfather." For a heartbeat, time froze. The church filled with murmurs as the old man walked slowly down the aisle, his cane striking the floor in deliberate rhythm. His hair was silver, neatly combed, and though his posture had softened with age, there was still a commanding air about him, the kind of presence that comes from decades of being obeyed. Laura's hands clutched the hem of her dress. "He wasn't supposed to be here," she whispered. Ethan turned to her. "You know him?" She nodded, her eyes shimmering with old fear. "He's my father, your grandfather, the man who made me believe you were dead." The officiant hesitated, glancing at Ethan, but Ethan raised a hand slightly, signaling to pause. The guests fell silent as the old man stopped halfway down the aisle, looking straight at him. "Ethan Carter," the man said, his voice deep, weathered by time. Ethan swallowed hard. "Yes. I'm Richard Bennett," the man continued. "I think we need to talk." Every head in the room turned. Olivia stepped closer, whispering, "Do you want him to leave?" Ethan shook his head. "No, I want to hear him out." They moved to the back of the church, away from the crowd, near a stained glass window where sunlight painted their faces in fractured color. Laura followed, trembling. Richard's gaze shifted between them. "I wasn't going to come," he said quietly, "but I saw the announcement in the local paper. Your name, your date of birth. I knew immediately who you were." Ethan's voice was steady but cold. "The son you made disappear?" Richard flinched. "I thought I was protecting my daughter. By lying to her? By telling her I died?" Ethan's tone rose, the weight of years pressing through every word. Richard exhaled deeply. "You don't understand the time, the pressure. Laura was 17. The father was gone, a boy from out of town. My reputation, our family's reputation, would have been destroyed. Your grandmother insisted the child be placed for adoption immediately. But Laura refused. She wanted to keep you. There were arguments." Laura's eyes glistened. "Arguments? You called me a disgrace. You locked me in that hospital room." Richard closed his eyes. "I regret that more than you'll ever know." "You told me he didn't survive," Laura said, her voice trembling between fury and heartbreak. "You looked me in the eyes and said he was gone." Richard's shoulders sagged. The doctor agreed to mark the record as stillborn. It was the only way to ensure the file stayed sealed. "I thought, if you believed he'd died, you could move on. You were so young." Ethan felt his pulse in his ears. You took 36 years from us. The old man's voice cracked. I took 36 years from myself too. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn envelope. I've carried this for a long time. Your mother wrote you a letter the day you were born. I never mailed it. I didn't have the courage. He handed the envelope to Laura, who froze, tears spilling freely now. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting familiar, her own. She looked at Ethan, her hands shaking as she passed it to him. Ethan unfolded the fragile page. Inside, the ink had faded, but the words still breathed. My dear Ethan, if someday you ever read this, know that I loved you from the moment I saw you. I hope the world will be kinder to you than it was to me. And if I can't be there to hold you, I hope you find someone who will. Love, Mom. The church seemed to blur around him. He could feel the weight of every year he had lived without those words. When he looked up, Richard was crying, quietly, ashamedly. I am sorry, he said. I can't undo what I did, but I wanted to see the man you became. I wanted to tell you that you were never unwanted. Not really. Laura's voice softened. Dad, you destroyed us. But if you're here asking for forgiveness, you'll have to earn it. Not from me, but from him. Ethan stared at the man who had shaped his mother's pain, his own absence. For a moment he saw not a villain, but a relic. A man trapped by the fears of another era. I can't forgive you today, Ethan said finally. But maybe someday. Richard nodded, his eyes wet. That's more than I deserve. He turned toward Laura. You raised a good man. Laura smiled faintly. No, the world did. I just got lucky enough to meet him again. As Richard left the church, sunlight hit the floor where he'd stood, glowing like a final confession. The guests, sensing the tension's release, slowly turned their attention back to the altar. Olivia squeezed Ethan's hand. Are you okay? She whispered. He nodded, his voice barely audible. I think I finally am. They returned to the front, the ceremony continuing, the air lighter now, as if the ghosts of the past had quietly stepped aside to let him live his present. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan turned to see Laura wiping her tears, smiling through them. She didn't look broken anymore. She looked free. As they walked out of the church under a shower of white petals, Ethan whispered to Olivia, You know what's strange? If that photo hadn't been taken, none of this would have happened. She smiled. Sometimes fate uses the smallest things, like a photograph, to open the biggest doors. He laughed softly, or to unmask the truth. But just as they stepped outside into the sunlight, Laura approached, her expression mixed with relief and unease. There's one more thing, Ethan, she said, voice trembling. Something I never told anyone. About your father. Ethan's smile faded. My father? Laura nodded slowly. He's still alive. The words hung between them like smoke. Soft, fragile, impossible to ignore. He's still alive. Ethan felt his heartbeat slow, each pulse echoing in his chest like the distant sound of a drum. For so long his mind had been filled with one question. Why did my mother abandon me? But now a new question emerged, heavier, sharper. Who was my father? They stood outside the church, sunlight spilling across the steps, guests chatting joyfully around them, unaware that for Ethan time had stopped again. Laura's hands trembled as she spoke. His name is Michael Turner. He was my first love, a boy from the next town over. He was 18. When I found out I was pregnant, he wanted to help, but my father threatened him. Told him if he came near me again, he'd be arrested for statutory rape. Olivia gasped softly. Ethan's jaw tightened. Laura continued, voice trembling. Michael tried to fight it. He called, he wrote letters. My parents intercepted everything. Eventually, he left town. I heard he joined the Navy. I never saw him again. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, struggling to take it all in. Do you know where he is now? Laura nodded slowly. I found out last year. He's back in Illinois, lives about 2 hours away. I never contacted him. I didn't think it would matter anymore. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, then at Olivia. It matters now. 3 weeks later, he drove alone to a small coastal town called Evanston. The air smelled of salt and diesel from the docks. He parked in front of a modest workshop with a hand-painted sign that read, Turner Marine Repair. A man stood inside, wiping grease from his hands, humming along to an old Springsteen song playing from a dusty radio. His hair was dark gray, his arms strong, and his posture familiar, like someone Ethan had known all his life but couldn't name. Ethan hesitated at the doorway. "Mr. Turner?" The man looked up, eyes narrowing in curiosity. "Yeah?" Ethan took a breath. "My name is Ethan Carter." Something flickered in Michael's expression. Confusion first, then realization. He froze, the rag falling from his hand. "Carter," he whispered. "Your mother's name was Laura, wasn't it?" Ethan nodded. "She told me about you." Michael took a slow step forward, his face a mixture of disbelief and awe. You can't be." His voice broke. "You're my son." Neither moved for a moment. Then Michael laughed, a choked, trembling laugh that turned into tears. "I looked for you. I swear I did. Your grandfather told me you'd been adopted out of state. He said you'd never know who I was. I didn't even know if you were alive." "I didn't know about you at all," Ethan said quietly. "Until recently." Michael's eyes softened. "Your mother, how is she?" "She's healing," Ethan replied. "We both are." Michael nodded, his hands shaking as he motioned to a stool. "Sit, please. Let me look at you." Ethan sat, and for a moment, neither spoke. There was too much to say and no map for how to say it. Then Michael smiled faintly. "You've got her eyes," he said, "but your jaw, that's all me." Ethan chuckled softly, the tension melting a little. "Guess I'm a mix of mistakes and miracles." Michael laughed, but his eyes glistened. "No, just miracles." They spent hours talking, about Laura, about the years lost, about the strange chain of coincidences that had led Ethan here. When he finally stood to leave, Michael placed a small wooden box in his hands. "I built this years ago," he said. "Didn't know if I'd ever get to give it to you." Inside was a compass, its needle still sharp, its surface engraved with 3 simple words: "Find your way." Ethan smiled, feeling his throat tighten. "I already did," he said. Weeks later, the newlyweds hosted a small dinner, both families together for the first time. Laura sat beside Helen and Mark, chatting easily, as if they'd always known each other. Michael arrived late, bringing a bottle of wine and a quiet nervousness. But when he and Laura saw each other, decades of distance dissolved into a simple, trembling embrace. As laughter filled the house, Ethan looked around the table and felt something he had never fully known before. Peace. Not the fragile kind that comes from pretending the past didn't happen, but the kind that comes from facing it and surviving. Later that night, as everyone left, Ethan and Olivia stood on the porch. The stars stretched endless above them. "Do you ever think," she asked, "how different your life would have been if you hadn't seen that wedding photo?" Ethan smiled. "Every day, but I don't think it was an accident. Maybe some things are meant to find you, no matter how long it takes." He took the compass from his pocket, the metal cool against his palm. "My life started with a lie," he said, "but it ends with truth." Olivia rested her head on his shoulder. "And family." Ethan looked back at the house where 2 mothers, a father, and a grandfather sat sharing stories they'd never thought they'd tell. "Yeah," he said softly, "and family. Truth always finds its way, no matter how deeply it's buried. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It redeems it." Would you have searched for the truth if you were in Ethan's place? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful true stories about love, loss, and redemption.